Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday night. I hope everybody's doing really well out there. It was a fairly nice day today in terms of weather, which is something that we haven't seen in a while, and it looks like it's liable to continue in that vein, which is very good and very nice, and I'm quite looking forward to that. I hope everybody's had a good weekend. We're going into another week of quarantine, but I hope that everybody's doing really well out there. I am here with some more Dune to try and alleviate some of the quarantine boredom that we've got going on. When last we left off, we had some chapters devoted to the Baron Harkonnen, and his little entourage. And we found out that they're having some trouble on Arrakis with a Fremen uprising led by a prophet by the name of Muad'Dib, who we know is in fact Paul. And then Thufir and the Baron discussed various strategies and faux pas that have been in place over the last couple of years. How about we see what happens? We're going to be hopping back in with Paul and his family to proceed. So let's see where we go from here, shall we? This is, I believe, chapter 38, and off we go. There is in all things a pattern that is part of our universe. It has symmetry, elegance, and grace. Those qualities you find always in that which the true artist captures. You can find it in the turning of the seasons, in the way sand traits along a ridge, in the branch clusters of the creosote bush, or the pattern of its leaves. We try to copy these patterns in our lives and our society, seeking the rhythms, the dances, the forms that comfort. Yet it is possible to see peril in the finding of ultimate perfection. It is clear that the ultimate pattern contains its own fixity. In such perfection, all things move toward death. From the collected sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. Paul Muad'Dib remembered that there had been a meal heavy with spice essence. He clung to this memory because it was an anchor point, and he could tell himself from this vantage that his immediate experience must be a dream. I am a theater of processes, he told himself. I am a prey to the imperfect vision, to the race consciousness and its terrible purpose. Yet he could not escape the fear that he had somehow overrun himself, lost his position in time, so that past and future and present mingled without distinction. It was a kind of visual fatigue, and it came, he knew, from the constant necessity of holding the prescient future as a kind of memory that was in itself a thing intrinsically of the past. Chani prepared the meal for me, he told himself. Yet Chani was deep in the south, in the cold country where the sun was hot, secreted in one of the new Sietch strongholds, safe with their son, Leto II. Or was that a thing yet to happen? No, he reassured himself, for Alia the Strange One, his sister, had gone there with his mother and with Chani, a 20-thumper trip into the south, riding a Reverend Mother's palanquin fixed to the back of a wild maker. He shied away from the thought of riding the giant worms, asking himself, or is Alia yet to be born? I was on Razia, Paul recalled. We went raiding to recover the water of our dead in Arrakeen, and I found the remains of my father in the funeral pyre. I enshrined the skull of my father in a Fremen rock mound overlooking Harg Pass. Or was that a thing yet to be? My wounds are real, Paul told himself. My scars are real. The shrine of my father's skull is real. Still in that dreamlike state, Paul remembered that Hera, Jameis's wife, had intruded on him once to say there'd been a fight in the Sietch corridor. That had been the interim Sietch before the women and children had been sent into the deep south. Hera had stood there in the entrance to the inner chamber, the black wings of her hair tied back by water rings on a chain. She had held aside the chamber's hangings and told him that Chani had just killed someone. This happened, Paul told himself. This was real, not born out of its time and subject to change. Paul remembered he had rushed to find Chani standing beneath the yellow globes of the corridor, clad in a brilliant blue wraparound robe with hood thrown back, a flush of exertion on her elfin features. She had been sheathing her crysknife. A huddled group had been hurrying away down the corridor with a burden, and Paul remembered telling himself, "You always know when they're carrying a body." Chani's water rings, worn openly in sietch on a cord around her neck, tinkled as she turned toward him. "Chani, what is this?" he asked. "I dispatched one who came to challenge you in single combat, Usul." "You killed him?" "Yes, but perhaps I should have left him for Hara." And Paul recalled how the faces of the people around them had showed appreciation for these words. Even Hara had laughed. "But he came to challenge me." "You trained me yourself in the weirding way, Usul." "Certainly, but you shouldn't—" "I was born in the desert, Usul. I know how to use a crysknife." He suppressed his anger, tried to talk reasonably. "This all may be true, Chani, but—" "I am no longer a child hunting scorpions in the sietch by the light of a hand globe, Usul. I do not play games." Paul glared at her, caught by the odd ferocity beneath her casual attitude. "He was not worthy, Usul," Chani said. "I'd not disturb your meditations with the likes of him." She moved closer, looked at him out of the corners of her eyes, dropping her voice so that only he might hear. "And, beloved, when it's learned that a challenger may face me and be brought to shameful death by Muad'Dib's woman, there'll be fewer challengers." Yes, Paul told himself. That had certainly happened. It was true past, and the number of challengers testing the new blade of Muad'Dib did drop dramatically. Somewhere in the world not of the dream, there was a hint of motion, the cry of a night bird. "I dream," Paul reassured himself. "It's the spice meal." Still, there was about him a feeling of abandonment. He wondered if it might be possible that his spirit had slipped over somehow into the world where the Fremen believed he had true existence, into the Alam al-Mithal, the world of similitudes, that metaphysical realm where all physical limitations were removed. And he knew fear at the thought of such a place, because removal of all limitations meant removal of all points of reference. In the landscape of a myth he could not orient himself and say, "I am I, because I am here." His mother had once said, "The people are divided, some of them, in how they think of you." I must be waking from the dream, Paul told himself, for this had happened. These words from his mother, the Lady Jessica, who was now a reverend mother of the Fremen, these words had passed through reality. Jessica was fearful of the religious relationship between himself and the Fremen, Paul knew. She didn't like the fact that people of both Sietch and Graben referred to Muad'Dib as him, and she went questioning among the tribe, sending out her Sayadina spies, collecting their answers and brooding on them. She had quoted a Bene Gesserit proverb to him. "When religion and politics travel in the same cart, the riders believe nothing can stand in their way. Their movements become headlong, faster and faster and faster. They put aside all thoughts of obstacles and forget that a precipice does not show itself to the man in a blind rush until it's too late." Paul recalled that he had sat there in his mother's quarters, in the inner chamber shrouded by dark hangings with their surfaces covered by woven patterns out of Fremen mythology. He had sat there, hearing her out, noting the way she was always observing, even when her eyes were lowered. Her oval face had new lines in it at the corners of the mouth, but the hair was still like polished bronze. The wide-set green eyes, though, hid beneath their overcasting of spice-imbued blue. "The Fremen have a simple, practical religion," he said. "Nothing about religion is simple," she warned. But Paul, seeing the clouded future that still hung over them, found himself swayed by anger. He could only say, "Religion unifies our forces. It's our mystique." "You deliberately cultivate this air, this bravura," she charged. "You never cease indoctrinating." "Thus you yourself taught me," he said. But she had been full of contentions and arguments that day. It had been the day of the circumcision ceremony for little Leto. Paul had understood some of the reasons for her upset. She had never accepted his liaison, the marriage of youth, with Chani. But Chani had produced an Atreides son, and Jessica found herself unable to reject the child with the mother. Jessica had stirred finally under his stare, said, "You think me an unnatural mother. Of course not. I see the way you watch me when I'm with your sister. You don't understand about your sister." "I know why Alia is different," he said. "She was unborn, part of you. When you changed the water of life, she—" "You know nothing of it!" And Paul, suddenly unable to express the knowledge gained out of its time, said only, "I don't think you unnatural." She saw his distress, said, "There is a thing, son." "Yes?" "I do love your Chani. I accept her." This was real, Paul told himself. This wasn't the imperfect vision to be changed by the twistings out of time's own birth. The reassurance gave him a new hold on his world. Bits of solid reality began to dip through the dream state into his awareness. He knew suddenly that he was in a hireg, a desert camp. Chani had planted their still tent on flower sand for its softness. That could only mean Chani was nearby. Chani, his soul. Chani, his Sihaya, sweet as the desert spring. Chani, up from the palmeries of the deep south. Now he remembered her singing a sand shanty to him in the time for sleep. And she had sung the walking song lovers shared on the sand, its rhythm like the drag of the dunes against the feet. He had heard someone strumming a baliset in another tent, and he thought then of Gurney Halleck. Reminded by the familiar instrument, he had thought of Gurney, whose face he had seen in a smuggler band, but who had not seen him, who could not see him or know of him, lest that inadvertently lead the Harkonnens to the son of the Duke they had killed. But the style of the player in the night, the distinctiveness of the fingers on the baliset strings, brought the real musician back to Paul's memory. It had been Chat the Leaper, captain of the Fedaykin, leader of the death commandos who guarded Muad'Dib. "We are in the desert," Paul remembered. "We are in the central erg beyond the Harkonnen patrols. I am here to walk the sand, to lure a maker and mount him by my own cunning, that I may be a Fremen entire." He now felt the Maula pistol at his belt, the crysknife. He felt the silence surrounding him. It was that special pre-morning silence when the night birds had gone, and the day creatures had not yet signaled their alertness to the enemy, the sun. "You must ride the sand in the light of day, that Shai-Hulud shall see and know you have no fear," Stilgar had said. "Thus we turn our time around and set ourselves to sleep this night." Quietly, Paul sat up, feeling the looseness of a slacked stillsuit around his body, the shadowed still tent beyond. So softly he moved, yet Chani heard him. She spoke from the tent's gloom, another shadow there. "It's not yet full light, beloved." "Sihaya," he said, speaking with half a laugh in his voice. "You call me your desert spring," she said, "but this day I'm thy goad. I am the Sayadina who watches that the rites be obeyed." He began tightening his stillsuit. "You once told me the words of the Kitab Alibar," he said. "You told me, 'Woman is thy field. Go then to thy field and till it.'" "I am the mother of thy firstborn," she agreed. She saw him in the grayness, matching him movement for movement, securing her stillsuit for the open desert. "You should get all the rest you can," she said. He recognized her love for him speaking then, and chided her gently. The Sayadina of the Watch does not caution or warn the candidate. She slid across to the side, touched his cheek with her palm. "Today, I am both the Watcher and the woman." "You should have left this duty to another," he said. "Waiting is bad enough at best," she said. "I'd sooner be at thy side." He kissed her palm before securing the face flap of his suit, then turned and cracked the seal of the tent. The air that came in to them held the chill, not quite dryness that would precipitate trace dew in the dawn. With it came the smell of a pre-spice mass, the mass they had detected off to the northeast, and that told them that there would be a maker nearby. Paul crawled through the sphincter opening, stood on the sand, and stretched the sleep from his muscles. A faint green-pearl luminescence etched the eastern horizon. The tents of his troop were small false dunes around him in the gloom. He saw movement off to the left, the guard, and knew they had seen him. They knew the peril he faced this day. Each Fremen had faced it. They gave him this last few moments of isolation now, that he might prepare himself. It must be done today, he told himself. He thought of the power that he wielded in the face of the pogrom, the old men who sent their sons to him to be trained in the weirding way of battle, the old men who listened to him now in council and followed his plans, the man who returned to pay him that highest Fremen compliment. "Your plan worked, Muad'Dib." Yet the meanest and smallest of the Fremen warriors could do a thing that he had never done. and Paul knew his leadership suffered from the omnipresent knowledge of this difference between them. He had not ridden the Maker. Oh, he'd gone up with the others for training trips and raids, but he had not made his own voyage. Until he did, his world was bounded by the abilities of others. No true Fremen could permit this. Until he did this thing himself, even the great Southlands, the area some 20 thumpers beyond the Erd, were denied him unless he ordered a palanquin and rode like a reverend mother or one of the sick and wounded. Memory returned to him of his wrestling with his inner awareness during the night. He saw a strange parallel here. If he mastered the Maker, his rule was strengthened. If he mastered the inward I, this carried its own measure of command. But beyond them both lay the clouded area, the great unrest where all the universe seemed embroiled. The differences in the ways he comprehended the universe haunted him. Accuracy matched with inaccuracy. He saw it in situ. Yet, when it was born, when it came into the pressures of reality, the now had its own life and grew with its own subtle differences. Terrible purpose remained. Race consciousness remained. And over all loomed the jihad, bloody and wild. Chani joined him outside the tent, hugging her elbows, looking up at him from the corners of her eyes the way she did when she studied his mood. "Tell me again about the waters of thy birth world, Usul," she said. He saw that she was trying to distract him, ease his mind of tensions before the deadly test. It was growing lighter, and he noted that some of his Fedaykin were already striking their tents. "I'd rather you told me about the Sietch and about our son," he said. "Does our Leto yet hold my mother in his palm?" "It's Alia's he holds as well," she said. "And he grows rapidly. He'll be a big man." "What's it like in the south?" he asked. "When you ride the Maker, you'll see for yourself," she said. "But I wish to see it first through your eyes." "It's powerfully lonely," she said. He touched the scarf at her forehead where it protruded from her stillsuit cap. "Why will you not talk about the Sietch?" "I have talked about it. The Sietch is a lonely place without our men. It's a place of work. We labor in the factories and the potting rooms. There are weapons to be made, poles to plant that we may forecast the weather, spice to collect for the bribes. There are dunes to be planted to make them grow and to anchor them. There are fabrics and rugs to make, fuel cells to charge. There are children to train, that the tribe's strength may never be lost." "Is nothing then pleasant in the Sietch?" he asked. "The children are pleasant. We observe the rites. We have sufficient food. Sometimes one of us may come north to be with her man. Life must go on." "My sister, Alia, is she accepted yet by the people?" Chani turned toward him in the growing dawnlight. Her eyes bored into him. "It's a thing to be discussed another time, beloved." "Let us discuss it now." "You should conserve your energies for the test," she said. He saw that he had touched something sensitive, hearing the withdrawal in her voice. "The unknown brings its own worries," he said. Presently she nodded, said, "There is yet misunderstanding because of Alia's strangeness. The women are fearful because a child little more than an infant talks of things that only an adult should know. They do not understand the change in the womb that made Alia different." "There's trouble?" he asked, and he thought, "I've seen visions of trouble over Alia." Chani looked toward the growing line of the sunrise. "Some of the women banded to appeal to the Reverend Mother. They demanded she exorcise the demon in her daughter. They quoted the scripture, 'Suffer not a witch to live among us.'" "And what did my mother say to them?" "She recited the law and sent the woman away abashed. She said, 'If Alia incites trouble, it is the fault of authority for not foreseeing and preventing the trouble.' And she tried to explain how the change had worked on Alia in the womb. But the women were angry because they had been embarrassed. They went away muttering." "There will be trouble because of Alia," he thought. A crystal blowing of sand touched the exposed portions of his face, bringing the scent of the pre-spice mass. "El Sayal, the rain of sand that brings the morning," he said. He looked out across the gray light of the desert landscape, the landscape beyond pity, the sand that was form absorbed in itself. Dry lightning streaked a dark corner to the south, sign that a storm had built up its static charge there. The roll of thunder boomed long after. "The voice that beautifies the land," Chani said. More of his men were stirring out of their tents. Guards were coming in from the rims. Everything around him moved smoothly in the ancient routine that required no orders. "Give as few orders as possible," his father had told him once, long ago. "Once you've given orders on a subject, you must always give orders on that subject." The Fremen knew this rule instinctively. The troop's watermaster began the morning shanty, adding to it now the call for the right to initiate a sand rider. "The world is a carcass," the man chanted, his voice wailing across the dunes. "Who can turn away the angel of death? What Shai-Hulud has decreed must be." Paul listened, recognizing that these were the words that also began the death chant of his Fedaykin, the words the death commandos recited as they hurled themselves into battle. Will there be a rock shrine here this day, to mark the passing of another soul? Paul asked himself. Will Fremen stop here in the future, each to add another stone and think on Muad'Dib, who died in this place? He knew this was among the alternatives today, a fact along lines of the future radiating from this position in time-space. The imperfect vision plagued him. The more he resisted his terrible purpose and fought against the coming of the jihad, the greater the turmoil that wove through his prescience. His entire future was becoming like a river hurtling toward a chasm, the violent nexus beyond which all was fog and clouds. "Stilgar approaches," Chani said. "I must stand apart now, beloved. Now I must be Sayadina and observe the rite that it may be reported truly in the chronicles." She looked up at him, and for a moment her reserve slipped. Then she had herself under control. "When this is past, I shall prepare thy breakfast with my own hands," she said. She turned away. Stilgar moved toward him across the flour sand, stirring up little dust puddles. The dark niches of his eyes remained steady on Paul with their untamed stare. The glimpse of black beard above the stillsuit mask, the lines of craggy cheeks, could have been wind-etched from the native rock for all their movement. The man carried Paul's banner on its staff, the green and black banner with a water tube in the staff. That already was a legend in the land. Half pridefully, Paul thought, I cannot do the simplest thing without its becoming a legend. They will mark how I parted from Chani, how I greet Stilgar, every move I make this day. Live or die, it is a legend I must not die. Then it will be only legend and nothing to stop the jihad. Stilgar planted the staff in the sand beside Paul, dropped his hands to his sides. The blue within blue eyes remained level and intent, and Paul thought how his own eyes already were assuming the mask of color from the spice. They denied us the Hajj, Stilgar said with ritual solemnity. As Chani had taught him, Paul responded, Who can deny a Fremen the right to walk or ride where he wills? I am a Naib, Stilgar said, never to be taken alive. I am a leg of the death tripod that will destroy our foes. Silence settled over them. Paul glanced at the other Fremen scattered over the sand beyond Stilgar, the way they stood without moving for this moment of personal prayer. And he thought of how the Fremen were a people whose living consisted of killing, an entire people who had lived with rage and grief all of their days, never once considering what might take the place of either, except for a dream with which Leet Kynes had infused them before his death. Where is the Lord who led us through the land of desert and of pits? Stilgar asked. He is ever with us, the Fremen chanted. Stilgar squared his shoulders, stepped closer to Paul, and lowered his voice. Now, remember what I told you. Do it simply and directly. Nothing fancy. Among our people, we ride the Maker at the age of 12. You are more than 6 years beyond that age and not born to this life. You don't have to impress anyone with your courage. We know you are brave. All you must do is call the Maker and ride him. I will remember, Paul said. See that you do. I'll not have you shame my teaching. Stilgar pulled a plastic rod about a meter long from beneath his robe. The thing was pointed at one end, had a spring-wound clapper at the other end. I prepared this thumper myself. It's a good one. Take it. Paul felt the warm smoothness of the plastic as he accepted the thumper. Shishkali as your boots, Stilgar said. He'll hand them to you as you step out onto that dune over there. He pointed to his right. Call a big Maker, Usul. Show us the way. Paul marked the tone of Stilgar's voice, half ritual and half that of a worried friend. In that instant, the sun seemed to bound above the horizon. The sky took on the silvered gray blue that warned this would be a day of extreme heat and dryness, even for Arrakis. "It is the time of the scalding day," Stilgar said, and now his voice was entirely ritual. "Go, Usul, and ride the Maker. Travel the sand as a leader of men." Paul saluted his banner, noting how the green and black flag hung limply now that the dawn wind had died. He turned toward the dune Stilgar had indicated, a dirty, tan slope with an S-track crest. Already, most of the troop was moving out in the opposite direction, climbing the other dune that had sheltered their camp. One robed figure remained in Paul's path. Shishkali, a squad leader of the Fedaykin, only his slope-lidded eyes visible between stillsuit cap and mask. Shishkali presented two thin whip-like shafts as Paul approached. The shafts were about 1.5 meters long, with glistening plasteel hoods at one end, roughened at the other end for a firm grip. Paul accepted them both in his left hand, as required by the ritual. "They're my own hooks," Shishkali said in a husky voice. "They never have failed." Paul nodded, maintaining the necessary silence, moved past the man and up the dune slope. At the crest, he glanced back, saw the troops scattering like a flight of insects, their robes fluttering. He stood alone now on the sandy ridge with only the horizon in front of him, the flat and unmoving horizon. This was a good dune Stilgar had chosen, higher than its companions for the viewpoint vantage. Stooping, Paul planted the thumper deep into the windward face where the sand was compacted and would give maximum transmission to the drumming. Then he hesitated, reviewing the lessons, reviewing the life and death necessities that faced him. When he threw the latch, the thumper would begin its summons. Across the sand, a giant worm, a maker, would hear and come to the drumming. With the whip-like hook staffs, Paul knew, he could mount the maker's high, curving back. For as long as the forward edge of a worm's ring segment was held open by a hook, open to admit abrasive sand into the more sensitive interior, the creature would not retreat beneath the desert. It would, in fact, roll its gigantic body to bring the open segment as far away from the desert surface as possible. "I am a sand rider," Paul told himself. He glanced down at the hooks in his left hand, thinking he had only to shift those hooks down the curve of a maker's immense side to make the creature roll and turn, guiding it where he willed. He had seen it done. He had been helped up the side of a worm for a short ride in training. The captive worm could be ridden until it lay exhausted and quiescent upon the desert surface, and a new maker must be summoned. Once he was past this test, Paul knew, he was qualified to make the 20-thumper journey into the Southland, to rest and restore himself, into the south where the women and families had been hidden from the pogrom, among the new Palmerys and the Sietch warrens. He lifted his head and looked to the south, reminding himself that the maker summoned wild from the Erd was an unknown quantity, and the one who summoned it was equally unknown to this test. "You must gauge the approaching maker carefully," Stilgar had explained. "You must stand close enough that you can mount it as it passes, yet not so close that it engulfs you." With abrupt decision, Paul released the thumper's latch. The clapper began revolving, and the summons drummed through the sand, a measured thump, thump, thump. He straightened, scanning the horizon, remembering Stilgar's words. "Judge the line of approach carefully. Remember, a worm seldom makes an unseen approach to a thumper. Listen, all the same. You may often hear it before you see it." And Chani's words of caution, whispered at night when her fear for him overcame her, filled his mind. "When you take your stand along the Maker's path, you must remain utterly still. You must think like a patch of sand, hide beneath your cloak, and become a little dune in your very essence." Slowly he scanned the horizon, listening, watching for the signs he had been taught. It came from the southeast, a distant hissing, a sand whisper. Presently he saw the faraway outline of the creature's track against the dawnlight, and realized he had never before seen a maker this large, never heard of one this size. It appeared to be more than half a league long, and the rise of the sand wave at its cresting head was like the approach of a mountain. "This is nothing I have seen by vision or in life," Paul cautioned himself. He hurried across the path of the thing to take his stand, caught up entirely by the rushing needs of this moment. And there we go. That is the end of tonight's chapter. So we'll see how riding the sandworm turns out for Paul tomorrow night. I would have done two, but we've run into another case where if I did, it would probably go over an hour, and I don't think either I or you need that right now. So, I hope everybody's ready to go into another week. I hope everybody's staying healthy, staying safe, and that everybody has a good week ahead of them. I think there's some pretty cool things coming up this week for all of us. So let's try and make that happen, huh? All right then. I will see everybody tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye bye.